Assalamu alaikum. You're watching Changing Times and I am Dr. Zubair Ghori. This is a special episode of Changing Times as today Pakistan's budget for 2016 and 17 was presented in the National Assembly, and this is a program is also a special transmission part that has been going on since morning on PTV World and other PTV channels also. So you have been listening about all the details. Let me just give you an overview of the federal budget today that have been presented. This has been given a growth target of 5.7%. The deficit is estimated at 3.8% of GDP and the revenue is expected to be 3.96 trillions. The total outlay of the federal budget is around 5 trillion rupees, and the largest chunk of this federal budget will be taken care of by the debt servicing that stands at about 1.86 trillion rupees, and the second largest is the defense spending and then the PSDP. But the hallmark of this budget that has also been said time and again during the programs today, and that we have also been discussing, that this time the Pakistani agriculture is going to be the main target because it has severely affected Pakistan's GDP growth in the last year, which was expected to be 5.5%, but it has registered only 4.7% growth, and the bad performance, the dismal performance from the agriculture sector is one contributing factor. So this time government is particularly focusing on the agriculture sector, and around 340 billion rupees have been particularly earmarked for agriculture sector, and this is in addition to the expected loans and subsidies and other areas that are promised for the farmers in different outlays that we are going to talk about. So and on the other hand, there is a good news for the farmers that pesticides may be given some reduction in prices, the fertilizers, and also the power sector is going to give them reduced prices for the electricity usage for the tube wells. So we'll be talking about some more details about this agriculture sector and also the defense and PSDP. So let me introduce you to the guest I have. I have Dr. Waqar Ahmed. He is the Deputy Executive Director of SDPI Pakistan. Dr. welcome to the show. And we are also joined by Dr. Shamail Dawood. He has been working as an entrepreneur and also constantly appearing in different economic affairs program. Doctor, welcome to the show. Dr. Waqar, may I start with you? Let me start with the agriculture sector. It was expected, it was there, or it is just we have received a kick, that's why we are going to focus on the agriculture sector this time?
I think the numbers demanded a very focused treatment for agriculture sector. It couldn't achieve its growth target.
Yeah.
The cotton crop, of course, went into negative growth rate, which had its impact not only on your manufacturing sector, but also your exports. There were delegations of farmers which had met the Prime Minister during the year. The Finance Minister, of course, also met the Pakistan Association of Farmers twice, actually. And
there have been some rallies and strikes on Lahore Mall Road also.
Absolutely. So there was a realization that farmer community largely faces 3 or 4 challenges. First, of course, is the low commodity prices in the world, which were already there. Second, of course, was in case of cotton and one other crop, of course, the non-conducive weather, of course, which was faced. Third, your regulatory and tax regime, which was faced by the agriculture sector. While you don't have direct taxes on agriculture, but your farmer still faces a lot of indirect taxes. Primary of them was energy taxes last year. For example, the farmer was facing a very high cost of diesel, which goes into tube well, for example, which goes into tractors, for example. The effective rate of general sales tax on diesel was 64%, which was simply unaffordable by the farmer. So a combination of these things, basically, I think.
Fertilizer prices and the seeds prices, certainly. The total input cost, you are saying that they were detrimental for this decision.
It was absolutely detrimental for the farmer. It forced the government to bring a very focused package. You remember there was a mid-year package as well in the third quarter when the Kisan package was of course announced. The Kisan package, the difference between Kisan package and what has been announced today is that Kisan package was largely production subsidy led. Of course, you were putting 5,000 rupees on the hands of the farmer. You were giving them tractor subsidy as well as subsidy for mechanization. Today, you have tried to alter their cost structure basically by bringing down the price of electricity faced by tube well, if electricity at all comes into the tube well. And then of course you've brought down prices of urea, the fertilizer. You have also you're also talking about introducing a new act for the promotion of seed, local seed in this country. So today was more about altering the tax and regulatory regime faced by your farmers.
And also there have been about 700 billion rupees announced for the loans that will be given to the farmers with the help of the private sector.
That's right. So with the aim to increase public-private partnerships in agriculture sector, particularly value-added agriculture sector, these loans are being designed. One would like to see the budget documents in greater detail to see how these loans would be better targeted to reach the poorest of the poor farmers, basically. Currently, what we do know is that the government is trying to make a move this year as well as next year, as the budget speech says, to bring a level playing field for the farmers, because the farmers are mostly comparing themselves with the Indian counterparts, where India has heavily subsidized their agriculture sector. They don't have any utility cost, including any electricity cost faced by the farmer. So in a country where you have the capacity to subsidize electricity and bring it to a zero cost, can certainly not be matched given Pakistan's fiscal situation, but any relief is certainly good news for the farmers.
Dr. Shmail, this may be a good news for the agriculture sector, but what about this? The many people are talking about this. This has skewed the whole balance in favor of the agriculture, and the industries and the services are maybe going to affect, although there is a direct relationship between the agriculture and the industry also, in terms of particularly cotton and other crops that can be related to the exports. But how do you see it, that it is a seesaw going on? One time maybe we were doing good last year for the industrial sector, and now we are maybe ignoring the industrial sector?
I think the reason why, perhaps, I mean, I'm just taking a guess, is that the agriculture, as the finance minister also mentioned in part of the speech, that we even lost our GDP, or a percentage of our GDP growth, because of the poor performance of our agriculture, and that affected our exports. But also, I guess the pressure or the political side of it.
How much GDP is affected? 0.7%?
Well, according to that estimate, is about 0.5%. Okay. So they would say that if that was the case,
but the cumulative effect 5%. Maybe more than that.
Yeah. So so we could have crossed 5% in terms of the targets. Having said that, I think that is one cause, but the political, as you mentioned, the farmers have been on the roads. Similarly, the livestock, relatively did better, but it still didn't perform as well. I mean, in comparison to the general agriculture, in terms of the commodities, and the fisheries also didn't do that well. So I think the unanimous push was that we really need to gain you can say, the traction in this sector. And we have to understand that why it's important, because this is still one of the biggest, being an agro based economy, it is still the biggest employer. It is still plays a heavy role in our economy, not because only of the textile, but also as one of the major employers of people.
But is it debatable now that Pakistan is an agriculture-based economy, or
no,
our services sector is?
It has always been known. It has
more
always
input
been
into
known.
the GDP.
Well, definitely, services sector has grown over the years. It is still now. It out of the total chunk of our GDP, services sector is the strongest, and it is growing. And it has also shown very positive results as compared to both the industrial sector and the agriculture sector. But having said that, still we have to understand what our forte is, and our forte is that we are an agro-based economy, and if we really focus on this, it can really take our economy further.
So you don't mind anything going in favor of the agriculture,
no,
maybe at the cost of the industry?
It is. What I would suggest is not only to focus on agriculture, then develop, as Dr. Saab was saying, Waqar was saying, that we should focus on the the value addition. We should go for the food processing segment, and we have local success stories that have done so well. So that needs to be really taken further, and we should go towards value added products that could be exported.
How about the corporate tax that has been reduced? It's a welcome.
That is really welcome from my side.
That is your heart, isn't it?
Yeah. So I mean, eventually, I think
still on a higher side. You may say
it is on the higher side. I mean, what we have proposed and we've been talking about, and the likes of the senior other people have been talking about, is that the corporate tax should be brought down to 20%. I mean,
Oh, you got
that's
You're
across the
asking for
board.
moon, aren't you?
Yeah, but that is a long way to, a long way ahead. But still, I think it's a welcome thing, because we were expecting that with the same pace every year, they were going 1% each year, and we were expecting, okay, this year it's going to come from 33 to 32. But
Maybe
then,
next time 30.
Yeah, then maybe next time. So, but I think they've jumped that to 31, and next time they're really going to, as promised, the government is going to bring it to 30%. So I think it's good. I mean, 2% is going to be a good
Yeah.
for the corporate and the listed companies,
Okay.
and
Okay.
definitely a welcome thing.
Let me go to Dr. Waqar Saab. Dr. Waqar, now come to PSDP, which is the third largest chunk that I can see here in the numbers that I'm facing after the defense. It's around 800 billion rupees, and it does not include the provincial departments that are going to work on the public sector development program. How do you see it? Or still we have to go into the detail that which areas of public sector development we are focusing? Are we focusing on still on education or health, or maybe on roads and infrastructure?
Dr. Saab, PSDP's composition largely follows last year's
Okay.
government preferences, of course. Naturally, the government has opened up a lot of projects in the transport sector, road and transport sector, that again, those projects need to be completed now, and you see that the largest chunk of PSDP
Okay.
will be going to the
That is
completion of
successive
roads.
budgeting for the last 2 years?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right, because these projects need to be completed. So it's almost around 190 billion rupees that will be going into that.
Okay.
The second biggest component is, of course, on your energy side. That carries a lot of weight in your PSDP. But this year, what the government has tried to do, only the year end will suggest whether they have been successful in doing that. They are trying to balance their investment into both electricity generation as well as the transmission and distribution side.
That's a good news.
Which is certainly a good
Yeah.
news, So we hope that these new projects which have been brought into the PSDP on the transmission and distribution side will essentially curb the theft and line losses basically in the system. There are around 25% losses, Then, of course, it is the vertically funded social sector programs which the government has tried
Like
to
BISP?
fund. So yes, BISP is, of course, one of the largest ones. They have invested money in higher education, which is around 88 billion
87?
rupees.
Yeah.
88 billion rupees. Then there are vertically funded programs in health, like the immunization program, the fight against polio, of course, which the Prime Minister is himself very focused on. So while, of course, one would like the federal government to have a larger focus on national social sector programs, one also feels that these programs are now post 18th Amendment, they are the jurisdiction of the provinces. So we'll only need to wait for the provincial budgets to see how much of a coordination there is across the PSDP and ADPs of the provinces.
Yeah, people are talking about that in the federal budget. There hasn't been that much increase in the education and health budgets. But are we just in criticizing the federal government, as you are saying that now it is the forte or now it is in the purview of the provincial governments? We have to see them what they are doing, because federal government's purview may not be falling into Lahore or maybe into Karachi or maybe into Peshawar. They are focusing on Islamabad and maybe FATA areas and other areas. Yes, there can be some individual programs, standalone program that federal government is supporting. So are we just in criticizing the federal government in this?
Dr. Saab, this is a very important point, and let me suggest an answer which is non-technical here. When the budget comes and when you look at the social sectors, or pro-poor sectors, for example, we shouldn't just look at the spending side of the budget.
Okay.
We also need to see that people's preference for education and health is altered by the taxation side of the budget as well, you see. Now, it is a fact that, for example, many of your incentives which we had seen in early 2000s to incentivize higher education through taxes included, for example, things like rebates for teachers, rebates for university professors. Those rebates have now been eliminated, actually. For the school teachers, of course, those rebates have been shrunk, actually. You also used
Rebate
to have...
in terms of...
So your tax liability used to
will be
reduce by
equal.
almost 70%.
Yeah.
That was a rebate which was allowed to the teachers. It's no more there there actually.
Okay.
Then you also had rebates for doctors who would work in far-flung areas, in rural areas where you have a market failure. Private sector cannot provide hospitals over there, but the government has to do that. But you can't get good doctors to go over there in public sector salary, so you used to provide them rebates, for example. The fact of the matter is, and I'm sure that Dr. Shumail can talk more about it, the taxes on education and health sector have increased to the extent that access to these social sector services is becoming difficult. Now, on the one side, you're increasing their cost of operation. On the other side, you're saying that I'll give you a subsidy. There's a contradiction on both sides, you see. So even if these sectors have been devolved to the provinces, it doesn't mean that federal budget hasn't got the lawful domain to alter incentives in education, health, clean drinking water, sanitation, for example.
Yeah, find another way. Dr. Saab, you want to comment on this?
Well, I agree with Waqar Saab. Definitely, I think as this sector, I mean, a large chunk of this sector in terms of the human development, social sector is being really looked after by the private sector.
Yeah.
Both in education
But
and
in
health.
yes, yeah.
And that in itself has never been declared a sector where, I mean, right now, for example, if we look at health, it pays all the utilities, etc., everything as a commercial entity.
Commercial entity.
Similarly, in terms of education, the only thing right now which goes in the favor is that right now within health they have not been subject to the sales tax regime within the provinces. But other than that, everything else is very commercial. So those inputs definitely can then get reflected in for those people. And as we know that 80% or more than 80% of the healthcare is delivered through the private sector.
Now, isn't it the case that it's the middle class or the upper middle class or the upper class which is going to these educational and health institutions? But the poorest of the poor going to the public sector hospitals and the public sector schools and colleges, they may not be affected.
Even in the rural sector, a lot of these individuals and a lot of the public is going to the private. They start from small doctors, which we call Atai doctors or quacks, and then they're going to, some are going to the basic health units. A lot of these units don't exist or they're not really working, and then they eventually go to the tertiary healthcare hospitals, etc. And in the larger cities, obviously the public from the middle class and sometimes all the classes are going there. But this is a myth that only the upper class or the upper middle class is going to the private sector.
Everyone wants to go for the quality.
It's not only the quality; it's the access, because the doctors are not, as Dr. Saab was saying, that the government has infrastructure, but people are not really there. So how to really bring that into the fold, which then can play its role. So how can the government really spend on those lines? That was the idea, that how could tax be utilized in giving them subsidies or making sure that maybe the private sector could start investing in those areas where the government can go.
Okay. Okay. What about this? If you talk about the tax increases in certain areas, particularly on the stock exchanges and the broker taxes have been levied on. What's that? Do you feel good about it?
I don't think it's going to be a welcome thing. Obviously, the government typically in a budgetary mechanism, they really look at whatever segments or whatever the growth drivers they see are really doing well, and those segments are taxed. What I always propose on your shows, on other programs, wherever we go, is how to increase those growth drivers, how to really increase
the cash cows.
How to increase your cash cows so that you can then
easy to milk them.
So right now the thing is, the burden is passed on the available cash cows, and sometimes that might not be the right way to go. But in the short instance, obviously, that is the available option for the government, and obviously it's going to be not taken lightly by the brokerage houses.
Okay, Dr. Waqar, coming back to you, the largest chunk is going into the debt servicing that we are not talking about at all, around 1.86 trillion, if I'm not wrong, and this is the by far the largest one, because 860 something for the defense budget, and that has also registered an 11% around increase. How do you see this? This is huge, isn't it?
I think, Dr. Saab, this is one area where we still need to do a lot, and I'm glad that Finance Minister's speech did allude to this point, that they are not there yet.
But how far?
By having a debt to GDP ratio at a little over 63% at the moment, it actually means that we have violated the Fiscal Responsibility Act.
That's
basically.
62 point?
It's actually around 59%.
Okay.
But that's not the point. Actually, the point is
no. What's the punishment for violation of this?
That's right. So several other laws have also been violated. But you're absolutely right. The punishment is certainly missing. But the fact is that is there a breaker in the entire system which can now stop us here? Or going forward, for example,
you mean to have a stopgap arrangement?
What I mean to say is that will the measures taken under this budget actually curtail the debt, stock of debt at this level? That to me is a question mark, and I can tell you why. What are the 2 or 3 big components which are contributing to this high and unsustainable debt to GDP ratio? The first and foremost, your circular debt in several sectors. In energy, for example, you have circular debt in almost all your loss-making public sector enterprises like railways, PIA. They are all having cash flow problems. So when I look at those circular debt issues, I still don't see a strategy for each one of them. Your circular debt in energy, for example, your economic survey yesterday informed us, has almost touched 533 billion rupees.
Yet again.
Yet again. The finance ministry had cleared it at one point, So why is it coming back again and again? It is coming back not because there aren't any legal measures that haven't been taken, but because there are operational and efficiency issues within those entities which are not being addressed,
Aren't they being politicized by the other governments which are sitting? Because I can see that largely the provincial government and the provincial departments are responsible for those debt servicing in many ways.
You must be correct, to some extent, Dr. Saab, you must be correct. And of course, every public sector enterprise is a political economy issue due to the political recruitments which have taken place. But let me just submit to you an example from PIA, for example.
Okay.
In the case of taking the case of privatizing PIA, or at least letting go of some of the government shares in PIA, the only mistake that the government did was that they were trying to do it in haste, for example, and the management wasn't on board. The same government previously has had successful privatization experiences where the management was taken into confidence, they were made stakeholders into the entire arrangement. So I think the lessons that need to be learnt is that nobody would be anti-efficiency, for example, in these entities. You need to build their stake going forward.
Since you have talked about this privatization, and last year it was targeted around 50 billion rupees, and this has fallen way short, around 12 billion have been accumulated for the whole 1 year, and next year's target is again 50 billion. If you haven't achieved it last year, and there are political, administrative, and efficiency issues that are there, and people are making it a political point, do you expect this 50 billion target to be met?
Indeed, this seems like an anomaly, Dr. Saab, and I think because government would be entering into the election cycle next year, you see, and you wouldn't like to have...
That's the last try?
Yes, that's right. And you wouldn't like to have measures on your book that make you look bad, And if I can just take the conversation back a bit, because now we're talking about a time in which you will need populist measures. Yourself and Dr. Shumail were just talking about, for example, the increase in taxation which has come in this budget. I think this will probably the last time you'll see an increase, because if the government announces another budget next year, probably they have an understanding that in that budget they will not be able to increase taxes in this manner, basically.
Dr. Shumail, your take on this. Now we are coming to the bushy areas, the taxation. There hasn't been that much great work on the direct taxes. Indirect taxes, there are a lot of propositions out there.
Well, the government definitely, today they were celebrating the idea that they have managed to still, change the ratios, and they have managed to increase the direct taxation to, I think, 43%, if I'm correct. And the indirect taxation is still, it's still high, but they have reduced it. But overall, going forward, it looks as if that the target that has been established in the budget, again, it's going to be very difficult for them, because we don't see any processes changing or any new avenues available to them, except that the non-filers might be, curtailed, and they might be pushed further to really file. But as I was sharing, that typically the burden is passed to the filer, and so eventually, again, it's the same that are within the net. So looks very you can say it looks very a huge target, but let's see how it's
5.7.
achieved.
5.7 is the next year, so 1% growth, it needs a huge effort because we couldn't get it from the previous year.
Because we don't see any new technology, any new technique, any new approach. The processes are the same.
But the numbers are
departments
growing. The revenue targets have already been met in 11 months, and they are expected to go ahead by 3 to 4% from the expected target from the last years. And if 3.96 trillion is there and that is achieved, so growth rate can be achieved in this regard.
But right now, the only measure that is available is just more coercive and heavy-handedness. But as I said, that maybe the provision that is there for to bring the non-filer and to make sure that there are more people who come and start filing. Right now, the avenue available is that yes, they will be punished through the banking channel, or if they go for the registration.
Do you have number what happened last year's measure, this 0.6% and then 0.3%?
Well,
what about the
we all
total
know
collection
that,
maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember what the numbers are, but there were a lot of, as you know, that throughout the year there was a lot of debate about it. The traders really went on an offensive, and then the government stepped back, and so back and forth. And eventually they gave time that people should start getting their house in order. But it was still, we didn't really see the results that were expected, because a lot of the people shifted towards the undocumented in the cash economy. And so how is that going to happen now? Is this trend going to pick up further, or are the people start coming back to the banking channel? So and I always suggest that also this is a good mechanism, but one of the very effective mechanism which the government should pick up is basically putting the commercial electricity, and that should be a mechanism where anyone who is doing any commercial activity, any business, any trader, anything, should be linked. And
they have linked, by the way. If you have an electricity bill of rupees
no, but you
20,000 and more,
no, not in that sense.
Charged.
No, what I'm saying is not in the sense of the size of your bill, but actually you would not even get a meter if you're a non-filer. You would not have access to electricity if you are non-filer and if you are doing a commercial venture. So that would then actually bring a lot more people, because when
you are a good arm twister.
No, I'm. You see, we all want the tax net to increase, because then the tax rates, because then our eventual dream that we want the 20% tax rate to come across the board would be achieved, because then our system would be flatter and broader, and there will be more people.
Dr. Vaghari, your take on this? Do you have number? How much has been collected last year?
Yes. So, Dr. Saab, as a result of our withholding tax on banking transaction, basically, until March, we had 8,000 non-tax filers who had come into the tax net.
More?
Basically, yes, 8,000 people had become tax filers. Now, once the analysis of these numbers started, which was, of course, a success measure for the government, IMF's 10th review pointed out that yes, it is a success, but how many of these individuals are actually high-value taxpayers?
Mostly salaried.
That's right, or maybe the Tajir class, as we call them, the trader community, for example.
No, what is the number of the collection of the? How many billion rupees did we collect due to this regime?
Yes, so the additional number was somewhere between 50 to 60 billion rupees, which wasn't a bad number, and this was until March. So now, because my information is dated, now the number would be much more, basically. But now, what happened later on is important. You were just discussing about how we are trying to achieve the tax target this year, and yes, the finance minister pointed out that we are there as regards the 11th month target, Now, I just hope that we don't repeat this again, because while the government was cash strapped, and in order to achieve the target, they stopped the sales tax refunds of the business community, number one. And number two, FBR also charged advanced tax. Now you have something called ACT, Advanced Corporate Taxation. So FBR can actually call you and ask you to pay that advanced tax, basically.
Okay.
That is how we were just able to meet this year's target. Now, this is a regime which you do not want to continue in future. This really discourages your businessmen into locking themselves. It locks their working capital, of course, but of course it also locks the long-term decision making that they have to do.
But what about the proposal of 1% this time?
Yes, so certainly this is where I'm coming to. So last year we were promised that in order to bring the tax filers into the tax net, you were expanding the purview of the withholding tax regime, and hence the WHT on banking transaction was pointed out. This year, people's expectation was, and that's what your consumer groups largely expected this year, that the withholding tax regime would actually be rolled back. So what Dr. Saab was just telling you, that there has been an improvement in the ratio of direct taxes versus indirect taxes. That ratio has come about because 85% of your direct tax is still collected in indirect tax mode, which is withholding tax.
Okay. That's again a regressive tax.
It is a regressive tax. It's an anti-poor tax, you know, basically. And this is a regime which you need to get rid of, basically, because poor faces a proportionately higher brunt of this taxation. However, and I hope that during the next 15 days, this will be debated in the National Assembly, that Finance Minister announced more withholding taxes this year.
Oh my God.
And amongst those 3 or 4 that I hope would be rolled back are actually on the savings instruments of our poor community. Withholding tax on price bond, withholding tax on mutual funds, for example. So these are savings instruments that your poor community basically enjoys relatively more. And that's something, your savings to GDP ratio is already down. Most of your GDP growth is coming from the consumption side, basically. So in order to promote that savings culture, and of course, letting people keep their money in the banking sector and not allowing the cash economy to grow, this withholding tax regime has to be done away.
Okay. Dr. Shmail, what about this, that the stock market today has registered all-time highest in the history of Pakistan? I want your comment on this. And secondly, this low interest rates, and last time perhaps we had talked about that the industry is also taking interest into this, because the government is not borrowing that much that it had been previously. So what about this? Apart from this budget, this can be a good engine for growth?
Well, first of all, the stock market obviously is doing well. It has done well progressively over the year. So it's a positive sign, and especially at the day when the budget was announced, it's a welcome sign. As far as the interest rate being dropped, and the State Bank dropped it before the budget, I think that's what I've read, and what I understand is that they were seeing that although the inflation has been down, and they are expecting that somehow that things are going to move a little bit up, and they were kind of like trying to make sure that the economy, the inflation is low, and they want to mobilize the borrowing, and hopefully as the trend has picked up, that the private sector would borrow, and that would help in growing, in maybe expansions, and especially now as the finance minister has also announced in the finance bill that there is going to be more incentive for expansion, setting up projects, etc. Mostly I think it's going to be medium to large scale manufacturing that's going to benefit from that. But eventually I think if the borrowing hand in hand with the tax incentives or tax breaks people get for their expansion projects, I think it's going to be a welcome sign, and especially the manufacturing sector and the industrial sector would definitely rally, and its performance, which has done, it's been in positive as compared to the agriculture.
There have been always a demand that the money is going into the real estate business, and they had not been properly taxed. But this time, this has been proposed that the transfer of property and the sale of property within the 5 years, there have to be a certain amount of tax. It is a good step.
That's a very good step. I think real estate is again an area where the undocumented part of our economy is parked. We all keep on discussing about that. Another, I think good sign would have been that right now the rates are decided at different district level, which are called the deputy commissioner rate, or the rates are decided by the government, and they should be opened up to the market, and that should be the mechanism of really gauging the value of the property, instead of having a lower floor, because that way a lot of the people actually undervalue the property, and the government really doesn't take home, the exchequer loses a lot of the from the taxation.
No, isn't it the dual or the triple taxation in this connection, that if you are going, for example, I'm going to sell or buy a property, so I have to pay a tax on this since I'm buying it, and since I'm paying through the banking transaction and I am not a non-filer, I have to pay 1% extra onto that. And if I'm residing in a province, and I will be residing in a province, I have to pay that, the provincial tax also. Isn't it a triple taxation?
Well, in that sense, if you become a filer, then at least then you don't go into the triple regime.
Yeah.
So I think the government is definitely trying to make sure that, you know, this is a large transaction. Definitely the person or the individual or the group that is purchasing or the transaction is taking place are definitely more affluent, and they can afford to do that. So I mean, they should pay their share, and if they're already taxpayers, then they would be the impact on them would be lower. But if they're not, then they would in this way be giving back to the exchequer whatever they should have been giving if they were filing their taxes.
Dr. Saab, your take on this? Is it triple or quadruple taxation maybe at some point? Because many people are advocating at this point that Pakistani population is all time at the highest level growth, around 3% it is growing, and we are touching around 200 million people, and one of the largest growing population, not only in the region, maybe in the world. So this is the demand that we are expecting. Since the tax on the cement, on iron and steel had also been increased, and also some of the furniture, the wooden furniture that is used, that has been increased, and now also in this sector. So if this is registering growth, are we trying to harness them?
Again, it's the same issue that it is not always ideal that one of the sectors sees a growth in one particular year, and you just start identifying that growth and taxing that sector, you know. But I think your point was very important about the double taxation issue, which has also been pointed out in the report by Tax Reform Commission. The Tax Reform Commission has recently submitted its report to both houses, both Senate and National Assembly Finance Committee, and what they are suggesting is that there should be an integrated filing at the federal as well as the provincial level. So if I am a businessman who, for example, works in maybe 3 different provinces, I shouldn't have to file with those 3 different bureaus of revenue, which there are after the 18th Amendment. Because even if my tax is collected by one of the provinces, just filing with 3 provinces means that my cost of tax compliance goes up. I cannot hire these many expertise of chartered accountants who can manage those 3 different bureaus, because then once you have filed, there will be audits, there will be reporting, of course, that needs to be done on a quarterly basis. That, of course, increases your cost of doing business as well. And you would recall that last year's World Bank cost of doing business report actually pointed out that your average SME actually spends 570 hours per year in just matters related to tax filing, compliance, and audits. This is the highest across
around
South
4
Asia.
months.
That's right. So unless an SME has actually hired full-time chartered accountants, which I'm sure most SMEs cannot do given their size, you cannot face this kind of an expensive tax regime in this country, basically.
That's what you're talking about, the business person. What about the real estate persons who are developers, who are, I'm not talking about the fake, I'm talking about the real ones who are working and developing and building and then selling it. Are they going to face the brunt because the prices will be going up?
Well, I think their commissions as well as capital gains had already been brought into the tax net, and you have seen in the budget speech that the rate on their commissions as well as capital gains tax has been increased this year. But I think your point also has another dimension, that if the land prices, for example, change, is the tax system responsive to it? Sadly, no. And this is something which now comes under the provincial domain. They need to update the land use tables. However, there is a vested interest at play, and of course, many of the parliamentarians come from the landed class, of course. We need to convince them that this is a national interest, and these land use tables, land rate tables need to be revised, basically, number one. And number two, the land rates across the provinces also need to be synchronized, basically. Currently, the moment I see that Punjab, for example, is now charging me a higher rate in terms of the property or agriculture land rates, for example, I can easily evade that by owning the same kind of land elsewhere in Sindh, for example, you see, because the Sindh may have a lower rate on land. This practice has to end basically, and it can end through what the government is trying to do now. They have submitted to Council of Common Interests a request for forming a provincial coordination committee in which the finance secretaries from all province will meet on a quarterly basis so that these rates of provincial taxes can be synchronized.
Okay. Just last thoughts?
Add,
Yes, please.
On this, I also suggest that there needs to be, just like the FBR has made a mechanism where you can go and see who's the filer and whatnot. Actually, there is talk about, not in Pakistan, but international level, where there is going to be a mechanism where people or entities will have access to who and what is the ownership. And that is actually the actual cause of the Panama leaks.
Okay, your overall take in the final moment, Dr. Shumail, on this
I
budget?
think overall, whatever I've discussed with colleagues, I think it's a good budget. I mean, there's always a wish list, and we hope that it will improve. What we see that this was the stability for the last 3 years. Now it's the growth. So what we need to see is that how can that growth be really transpired into those high target of 5.7%. So we look forward that the government will really come out with some innovative processes to achieve that target.
Dr. Waqar, your take on this is the overall 5.7?
I think, Dr. Sab, if I can just, in my final remarks, let you have those expectations which were not realized in this budget, for example. And those were largely related to simplification of your tax regime. While reforms of tax policy are important, you need to reform your direct taxes, your indirect taxes. Equally important is to improve the face of that tax authority, which has to forge a new social contract between the taxpayer and the taxpayee. We know that amnesty schemes don't work. We know that coercive taxes like withholding taxes won't work. Ultimately, it is your social contract between the taxpayer and the payee, it'll work. And that can only happen if you also bring in tax administration reforms in this country.
Thank you very much, Dr. Waqar, and thank you very much, Dr. Shumail, for sharing your very valuable thoughts. Ladies and gentlemen, we have tried to give you various different sides of this budget that has been presented today. The special programs and special transmission on Pakistan's federal budget 2016 and 17 will continue. We'll be talking about in a further detail in tomorrow's program also. But for the moment, you can give your suggestions, comments and feedback on facebook.com/Dr. Zubair Qori official, and my Twitter handle is Dr. Zubair Qori. That's all from us tonight. A very good night. Allah Hafiz.